Hello to everyone, and welcome to this session with Charly Kleissner and Alexandra Korijn. And my name is Endre. I'm hovering around as your digital buddy and tech helper and a coordinator for Katapult Cloud. So if you have any questions, shout to both the panel or technicalities, address them to me, or feel free to participate in the conversation by asking questions in the chat. And we're getting closer to the end of today's event, so you might not have the need for going out and finding more technical help in the sessions in the what's it called? Sorry, I'm getting a bit tired. No, in the tech support center in the session area. But if there's something you need, you will find people who are able to help you over there. And for all of you who are still participating in this, we would always want you to participate and enjoy and explore and have fun with the Katapult Cloud. And with that, I think I'll just give the word to Charly and Alexandra. So have a great session and good luck.
Thank you so much for queuing that up for us. I will maybe start with asking everybody to take 3 deep breaths as people trickle in, and then we'll get started. So welcome, everybody. I wanted to start out with quickly introducing myself, and then I'll hand it over to Charly to start getting into our conversation. We'll make it very interactive in terms of our conversation between us, but also please jump in the sidebar of the chat and please ask us questions there as well. We'll have a formal Q&A at the end, but if there's any burning things or unclarities, that we can pick that up on the side. So with that, I'm Alexandra Korijn. I go by Ali, and I'm an impact investor and very passionate about systems change. I met Charly very early on in my impact investing journey. About 10 years ago, I snuck into this event that was the Tonic launch in Europe. And it was, they were just trying to set up, so Tonic is a community of active impact investors globally that are really trying to put their capital to work for impact, particularly deep impact. And I met him there, got convinced, but took me 3 years to start activating my own family for impact. And so 3 years later, I joined Tonic. And they've been very instrumental in my and my sister's, as well as my whole family impact journey. In 2 ways in particular. One was we came in very much just with equity, and through to learn about the whole portfolio approach. So putting 100% of our assets to impact. And second of all was the incorporating into every part of our lives. So instead of just looking at impact investing as one tool, is really about how do you incorporate that into everything that we do. And this conversation today is very much an extension of that journey. So with that, so Charly is one of the co-founders of Tonic, so that's the context, as I said. But you've done a lot of other things as well, Charly. So I'll quickly hand it over to you to introduce yourself more fully. And then I'd also love, after you've introduced yourself, to briefly touch on the meaning of the session. So the title of the session, if you can.
Well, that's great. Thanks, Ali. I'm delighted to be on this session with you and look forward to our conversation, and also to the conversation with the people who join us in this session. As Ali said, I'm a co-founder of Tonic, and I'm also a co-founder of KL Felicitas Foundation together with Lisa. And in the context of that foundation, we're considered early adapters of impact investing and early leaders of impact investing. And in the last couple of years, personally, I've been pushing on what more people refer to as deep impact, and we will talk about that today a little bit more. And so I want to thank also everybody who is joining, and again encourage you to speak up in the chat so we can make it interactive. So with this, I do want to reflect a little bit on the title that we came up with. And the time of disruption has come, and be the disruptor. And so in my opinion, we are in the middle of a major big disruption, and that started a few years ago. It doesn't really matter when. And it started in order to guide humanity to figure out how to live in harmony with the planet and the universe. And the outcome of this big disruption is either going to be that we figure this out, or that it's going to be quite uncomfortable for humanity, and we don't know how that might end. And in the context of COVID-19, COVID-19 has not caused this disruption. It's just a symptom of that disruption. And so the question, and if we actually don't deal with the root causes of the why COVID happened, more of that will happen. More of that disruption will happen predictably. We don't know when, but it will happen, because if we don't fix the root causes, then of course history will repeat itself. And so we need to develop the consciousness and the awareness as a humanity and as individuals that allow us to actually make sure that the system doesn't snap back into where we come from. And so we need to be the disruptors. We need to be the disruptors of the disruption in order not to allow it to snap back. Because if we snap back, then we will go back into the hamster wheel, and we will experience it again and again until we wake up. And so what are the root causes of COVID-19 and these bigger issues? Well, they are our economic and financial system. And COVID-19 has allowed us to really realize that even if we're not trained as systems thinkers, even if we're not trained as economists, even if we're not trained as financial analysts, it's heartbreaking to see how the food global supply chains are breaking down because of the system that we've accepted as the global food supply system. That is only there to maximize profits for everybody on that supply chain, right? It has nothing to do with guaranteeing food for everybody on the planet. It's heartbreaking to see what COVID-19 has allowed us to see now plainly, particularly in the US, but not only in the US with respect to racial injustice, where the minorities are disproportionately affected by the negative impacts of COVID-19. It's disheartening to see how the essential workers are actually the workers that don't get paid a lot, right? The social workers, and they're essential. And us privileged people, we don't have to do that. We are sitting back and can concentrate on what we do. COVID-19 has brought into focus how we treat elders. They're dying disproportionately all over the world. And last but not least, they have shown us hotspots of just awful design in our prisons and our meat factories that contribute, to the unsustainability and the deaths of many people. So why did COVID-19 happen? Well, because we are limiting the living spaces of species all around the globe that enable these viruses to jump from one to the other. And if we hadn't done that, it would not happen, right? And the reason why we do that is because it's very profitable to cut down trees and to cut down habitat. It's very profitable to make the global food supply chain work and farming work, but it's not sustainable, it's not resilient. And so that it was shown to us in no uncertain terms that this is what's happening, right? And so now humanity has a chance to either, and we all individually have a chance to do one of three things. We can accept, the unraveling and just be despaired and feared and frightened, or we can accept the snapping back to the status quo, which is happening right now, or we can change to the next level. And I invite us to actually, participate with the Katapult community and other communities to do the last. So in order to do that, last point, Ali, and then I hand it back to you, is we actually individually have to make a commitment to justice and equality. we have to individually acknowledge that we are the beneficiaries of the existing system in order to change it, right? If we don't recognize that, then we will not be, then it's going to be an intellectual exercise to say, oh, let's change the system, let's do this systemic change. And that brings me back to you, Ali, and say, well, the subtitle of our conversation is Systemic Change is Personal. Can you share with us a little bit why that is the case?
Yeah, sure. It's thank you for sharing all of that. I think it sets the context really well in terms of the system that we currently live in and the change that needs to happen. And like you also highlight the fact that we are beneficiaries of that system. And so if we want to change the system, it kind of starts with ourselves. And some of those truths are quite uncomfortable. And those are the ones I think that are really worth looking at. But that being said, so my personal journey, it started very much with my partner in crime, Josephine, who's my sister. And together we, about, like I said, 10 years ago when we started this journey together, we created this impact investing strategy. And this was before we'd ever done an impact investment. And so it was very, it was a good exercise just to kind of focus our attention, understand our values, and understand why we were doing it and what we were trying to achieve. But it was also quite disconnected from the reality, I think, of impact investing. And so when we joined Tonic and started to build capital, we learned so much about just really the realities of impact investing and the opportunities that are there and sort of how to match your ideal or your idealistic views maybe of the world to real deal flow and sort of make them more actionable. So we did that for many years. Then only about 2 years ago, we finally went back to our strategy and rewrote that. And this was very much influenced with this larger system change perspective. Many of those realizations came out through Tonic and the other work they were doing in impact. It was just a realization that we need much larger change than we are currently creating with our singular impact investments. And we really need to think larger than just, small singular impacts in very local areas. I mean, to think about what systems they're connected to and how we change those. So we rewrote it, but it was still very much focused on our impact investing strategy. So it's still very much like, how do we create system change through the tool of impact investing to create this new economic and financial system? And then luckily I got invited by Charly a couple months ago to join a group called the Deep Impact Group. And that was the first time I did an exercise of actually looking about deep impact in my whole life and creating, we call it the Deep Impact Statement. And it's really about, who am I? How do I show up? How do I show up to myself? How do I show up to others? So my family, my friends, my community. And then what is my work? And then how do I also relate to nature? So it's a really helpful exercise to make something that the systems change such a big concept. And I found it initially quite difficult to ground into, okay, so what does that mean to change systems? Like, I'm just one tiny human being. And so the statement that was very well organized helped me think about, what is the world? What are my beliefs currently about the world? What is my personal theory of change? Like, what do I see my role as being in terms of changing what I see as the world and systems? And then also, what are specific examples in terms of my investments or broader life in where I'm exercising deep impact? So that was a little tidbit of my journey. And I'll just add one thing to it, is that as fun as it was also extremely challenging, because once you have to actually, it's one thing to speak about it, like right now, even on this session, but it's another thing to write it down. And you start seeing some of the gaps and inconsistencies in your life. And that's where some of that discomfort comes from that we talked about earlier. And really thinking about those and how to change those. So anyway, that's my journey. So I will turn it back to you, Charly, and ask you, how has systemic change become personal for you and Lisa? And how does that relate to what you call deep impact?
Great. Yeah, good points here. And And I just wanted to reflect on your comments that it's quite uncomfortable to go on this journey. And if it's not uncomfortable, then we don't go deep enough, because we need to challenge our own assumptions, which is hard to do. And especially if you're wealthy and you have impact capital to deploy, we need to deploy it with full transparency and full acknowledgement that unless we change the system, we are part of the problem as well. And that's hard, and there's no easy answers to these deep questions. And that's why a community is so important to have around you to explore that journey together. So deep impact, I was inspired by, let me first talk about deep impact and then my own personal journey. So deep impact, I learned about deep ecology through friends of ours, and which was coined by a Norwegian Arne Næss, and I was really inspired by the difference between what he called deep ecology and ecology. And if I paraphrase what I learned from him and his writings, it's basically deep ecology is a non-anthropocentric way of looking at the environment, right? A non-human centric way. So it's acknowledging that we're not the only ones, but that we are part of the universe, that we are part of nature, that we are part of everything around it, and not special and not outside. And therefore we have a responsibility and accountability to take care of everything around us in that context, and not be egocentric, not be human centric. And I think, deep impact investing is pretty much the same. It's taking a soul level approach, I sometimes call it, to impact investing. Because if we just take a mind or a heart centric view, if you just invest with your mind, the mind makes up all these stories. And if you actually observe it, a lot of the stories are not true. And then you end up with non-deep impact, but an intellectual exercise. If you only go in with your heart, and you're very compassionate, that's great, but you most likely will lose all your money, right? Because you need to have the discipline to actually analyze things and make sure that they work. If you go in with your soul, which is deeper than your mind and your heart, then by default, your soul probably persists beyond your own lifetime. And so you have that in mind, you're on the right track. And so that level of reflecting on the impact on a systemic level with awareness and consciousness, and with a bigger view that's not just a humanistic view, but a world view, is what we call deep impact. So I think the second question then was what's my and our approach, to deep impact. And so I believe fundamentally that the impact of our own lives is a reflection of who we really are on the soul level, not the mind level, not the heart level, but as a human being on this journey here on this planet together. So if you are a very caring person, right? If you're a very compassionate person, it will show up in your life. It will, because that's who you are, right? And if you're very angry and very anxious and very fearful, it will show up. No hiding, right? And so that's why we all need to work on ourselves, because we all have these emotions and thoughts in order to ground ourselves to go deep. And furthermore, I think that humanity's trajectory is a direct expression of human consciousness. And right now it looks very mixed to me, where we will end up. And therefore, what we have decided to do for the rest of our lives is to make our small contribution to this emergence of deep impact, to this emergence of a transformation. And we're just small little pieces in that emergence. We're not the only ones. It's a beautiful emergence everywhere happening. I'm sometimes inspired by the Shambhala warriors, that all over the world are waking up and starting the disruption. And we'll talk hopefully a little bit more in this conversation about that. But that's our own entry point into this. Now, we talked a little bit about the terminologies, the theory of change, which sounds a little weird, right? But can you walk us through a little bit how you actually did that, and how do you get your your mind and your soul around that, ending up somewhere where that you can share with the world, and walk us a little bit through the challenges and opportunities that you explored on that journey into deep impact.
Yeah, sure. Like I said earlier, I found it quite challenging in terms of writing it down, because I think up until then, when you first approach it from, or when I first approached it from an impact investing perspective, I think it was too much of an intellectual exercise initially. So then when I had to fit that into the format that I just posted in the chat, which is the structure of the theory of transformation, theory of change, deep impact principles, and examples of deep impact in my life, I realized it was very rational and very analytical, which is the part of my brain that I'm usually most comfortable with to kind of lead me. And I hadn't fully incorporated all the other aspects into that statement. And so there's been very many iterations already. I think what was very helpful for me is being part of the group. I see some of the faces actually here in the group, or I see some of the names popping up in the chat that are in the group with us. It is like being able to share statements, first of all, very helpful. So everybody else's statements seem way more profound, and probably is way more profound than mine. It was just so nice to read each one of them, and then be able to, there were certain aspects I really resonated with and I could incorporate in mine, in my own language and in my own way that I express that in my life. And there are others that are just very individual. So I would look at some of those statements and say like, that's absolutely gorgeous. It's not me, but it's such an amazing expression. I can see that person right there, like as they've expressed that. In terms of maybe very briefly, I can just quickly run through or express my deep impact theory of change, which maybe grounds it a little bit in terms of what that looks like. And then maybe we can talk a little bit after that, Charlie, about what does it mean to, like, what can people do if they want to go on a similar deep impact journey? Maybe sharing a little bit in terms of what people can do. Either themselves or create their own group. I guess one more thing that I'll add in terms of being part of a group. I personally really need the accountability. Maybe I'm really lazy, but having like every 2 months that calendar invite in my calendar and knowing I have to go back to my statement and sort of update it was really helpful and created this pressure and helped me prioritize in my life. And I think if I wasn't part of a group, and anybody can create a group, right? Like it's not something that other people can't do. I think it was, if I hadn't had that, I think it would be very difficult to prioritize that and not let sort of the everyday of life take over. Anyway, that was enough on that. In terms of my statement, my theory of change, very briefly, it is to live a life of deep impact, which for me means contributing towards building a regenerative impact economy, a meaningful connection with myself and with others. And I've made it a little bit more actionable in terms of breaking it out in 4 aspects, which is the connection to the self, connection to others, connection to meaningful work, and then connection to nature. And so each of those 4 elements, which I won't bore you with right now, I've sort of broken down with my daily practices and my activities to bring those to life in my everyday. And this statement, at least the way that I'm intending to use this, is sort of a check with myself. So once in a while, I can go back if I'm maybe considering a new role or different activity, or I don't know, kind of just a general check-in with myself. I can go back to the statement and see if I'm living in alignment with that or not, and whether I need updating or change, or whether the document needs to be updated and changed according to the new awareness or realities. Anyway, so that's a little brief insight into the statement. But now handing it over back to you, Charlie, in terms of how can we, if people want to disrupt, if people want to create deep impact, what can they do right now to do that?
Right, and thanks for sharing your inspiring statements with this group as well. And you can see, I think, and you can feel how deep it goes and how deep that exploration goes, right? And that it's not over at any point in time. I think once you go on this journey, it's a one-way journey until you die. And you go deeper and deeper and deeper, and there's no returning. And because it's not your mind that's doing it, it's not your heart, it's who you really are. The essence of who you are is doing it, and that makes the difference. So I'm mindful of the time. So this is the last comments that we do, I think, and then it's in my time it's 9:56. So we have 4 minutes to do the closing statements, and then there's so much great comments going on in the chat. I feel like we should answer all of them and go into conversation. We will not be able to do that. And Ali, you should share how people can get in touch with us and how you want to follow up if that's not clear, before we open it up for Q&A. So back to what you can do to go deep and to disrupt, right?
Yeah.
So I think it should be clear by now that in order to go deep, you have to do the work, the personal work to go deep. It doesn't just happen by itself. And the way to do that is with mindfulness practice. There's many different mindfulness practices, in very different traditions and wisdom traditions all over the world. This is not religion. It's mindfulness practice, right? To go deep into exploring who you are and what the purpose is of your life. So you can do that with meditation, with yoga, with reflection, with walking, with going into nature, with surrounding yourself with loving people, and combinations thereof, right? And so then if you do that and you make a commitment to do that, then you will be able to predictably go deeper. It's not that hard, but you have to make that commitment, right? And to the second part of be the disruptor. So we talked about, if we're not the disruptors, then the system will snap back into where it's coming from, and we see that happening already now, right? And so I would suggest maybe 3 things for you to reflect on to be the disruptor, and not in priority order. First, disruption happens regionally, locally, where you are, right? And so insert yourself into where you live, into the local community, into the regional systems, to disrupt the global supply chains, to disrupt the globalization that's toxic, and rediscover the beauty of resiliency of regional systems and how you can influence them to do that, right? That's a very big shift in how the economy is organized today if we're able to do that. Number 2 is speak up. Call things out as they are, however, in a non-judgmental way. So don't fall into the trap of augmenting the agony of the discussions between the camps. Just say it as it is. These are facts. The global supply chain systems don't work. Here's the fact. The elderly are not being taken care of. That's a fact, right? And so I think by doing that and insisting on that, we can make a big contribution to anybody that we talk to. And thirdly, we all have our networks. We all have our jobs. We all have our activities, and we need to bring it home on that level too. And then we need to challenge our jobs. We need to challenge maybe our family, again, in a non-judgmental way, our friends, to reflect on that and see and wake up, to who they really are, and therefore they will then see it as well. So those are, I think, 3 concrete things. If many people would do that, the world would look very, very different. And I'm very not hopeful. I'm convinced that this is what's happening, and we just need to figure out if we're on time or not. And that's a different question. Back to you.
Yeah, I think particularly your last point about non-judgment, I think is a really important one, and this concept of nonviolent communication. So really trying to understand where people are on their journey, and being non-judgmental about that, I think is really important. So it doesn't become, again, this exclusive group of people doing these inner reflections. It becomes a very inclusive one. So that's my reflection on what you just said. Yeah, I don't know, as final statement, because we're at the hour, so I actually want to open it up and because there's really interesting questions.
Yeah.
I guess the only thing I'll leave with is just, to very much encourage everybody to think about systems in their personal lives, which is the tagline that we started with. So anyway, with that, I will connect. I'll look quickly at some of these questions. There's one from Johannes around, he's saying a lot of my time is focused on trying to convince people of systemic change. Is it more effective to spend time on doing or rather than convincing? Like, how do you balance those two things? And actually I want you to answer that, Charly, because I feel like you somehow have found a way to do both.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I've thought about that a lot because it's a really deep question with respect to where you spend your time with whom you spend your time with, and where the leverage points are with respect to these types of conversations. I'll give you an example of that it's important to tune into whom you talk to. So, if you get a chance to talk to an active general of the military about meaningful peace, it's not his fault that you might not have a great conversation because his life is not really into meaningful peace, right? And not because he's a bad person necessarily, right? We don't know who he is, but that's who he is. And therefore, or one more example. I was invited to talk to 25 hedge fund managers maybe 6-7 years ago, or maybe even longer ago in London. And I remember that room, hedge fund managers, mostly male, I think all male, of course, right? And I started talking about hedging, not about consciousness, because if I start talking about consciousness, they will throw me out or they will not be able to listen, right? Because and again, they're not bad people. They're just, what they do is hedging, right? Hedge fund managers. And yet, when at the end of my conversations and my remarks, I was able to, because they listened to me, because I started out talking about why impact investing is a hedge against, everything is, they were able to follow me into a little bit of a deeper conversation. And 5 of them out of the 25 actually asked some really meaningful question. And one person, about 3 months later, wrote me that he changed jobs, which, I don't know if that's a good impact or not. Be that as it may, the point is different, that you don't talk to somebody about consciousness if they're not ready to live it, to be it. Mm. And because then it's going to be an intellectual exercise, and it's okay to just talk about these concepts intellectually. Many people do it. It's not bad, but it's not going deep enough, as I tried to explain before. And I recently, with the 100%ers, led a reflection on detachment from outcome. Yeah. And we're all attached to many different things, right? And we're attached to our wealth maybe a little bit. We're attached to where we live a little bit. And it's difficult to let that go. And ultimately, most of us are attached to our lives. And so going deep means that you try to figure out how to not be attached to that, so that you can do the meaningful work. And so where I landed on this one is that I would like with my life to work mostly with people who are on the cusp of being more aware, because then maybe we can together go deeper. Yeah. And if they're not really there yet, there's other organizations, other great efforts, and they're just where they are. It's not that they're bad or not doing their work, but once that you get ignited, then I think we can really collaborate deeper. And so then that leaves the question open about who is the igniter. And I think there's many out there, right, that do that as well. And it's a very worthwhile task. And hopefully they're very, very, very successful, so that we can collaborate with many more, aware people to go deeper.
Wow. Okay. And so on terms of, I'm actually going to pick up on your non-attachment. There's a question from Edwin that I think very much builds on that, because he says, Charly said, if you think with the heart, you may lose all your money. So wouldn't it be the biggest lesson and chance if we just all lose our money? And so I just had to think of that question when you were just talking about non-attachment. What I think it touches a little bit on the book of Anand's Karadas. I'm like butchering his name right now in terms of, should we be having wealth at all? Anyway, do you have any comments or thoughts on or reflections on that?
Absolutely a valid point, right? And I think we get to talk to a lot of people with wealth, and it's not surprising, particularly the people of wealth that have inherited their wealth. It's not an easy life for them, and most people don't have compassion with them because they say, well, they're rich kids anyway, right? And that's true on one level, but all of them are conflicted and have guilt trips because of that. And the only way out of that is to actually align it with impact and be transparent about it, what you do. Because if you do it behind closed doors, and if you do it well, without transparency, then you don't really tap into the energy alignment that has to happen with what you do with money and your wealth and the state of affairs of the planet. Yeah. And so I think either, if you're not ready to do that, maybe the alternative is to give it away. But if you do have wealth, you got to make it do something positive with transparency and conviction, and deploy it to change.
And so, yeah, no, I resonate with, again, some of the stuff you said.
And do you? I mean, Ali, you're one of these next geners. I'm not next gener. So we have two generations on this conversation. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I very much, as you said, it started with guilt and disassociation. So separating myself. I mean, I'm still separate from the wealth. It's not me. It's not who I am. But I think I took that to a whole different level. I just pretended it wasn't there for a long time because I wasn't ready to accept that as part of the resources that I had. And I wanted to prove myself, and I wanted to go on my journey. And luckily, my parents let me do that. And I went on my own journey. As you know, I went to India and kind of got to see everything myself. And when I came back, it helped me understand, okay, so I can either pretend it's not there, or I can acknowledge it's there and do something good with it. I really try to practice non-attachment to it. Like you say, it is not mine, and it actually still to some degree doesn't feel like mine because I didn't necessarily make it. And at the same time, I feel very grateful that it is there because I feel like I can use, like I said, the theory of change to actually action that with more resources than just my energy and my time. And so I just see it as one additional tool that I can use towards creating a better world. But yeah, it's been a journey for sure. And
maybe I saw Frank's message here. Do you mind if I try to answer that one? So we have to become a monk. Yeah. I thought about that a lot, Frank and others, right? So when I stepped off the treadmill in Silicon Valley and had to decide what to do with the rest of my life, I read up on things and I tried things out, and I was inspired by the many different things, including the Bhagavad Gita, which is a holy text out of the Vedanta treatise, right? And they say, which resonated with me, there's 4 ways to enlightenment, and one of them is the way of action. I'm an action person, and I'm not a monk, and I don't, I do meditation, but I don't want to sit in a cave for the rest of my life. I actually want to bring everything that I can bring to the table, and I see life as a meditation. I see life as yoga. In my deepest aspirations, I would like to switch around my life. Right now, I feel like I get into a really, really blissed state when I do meditation and yoga and other activities. And then when I wash the dishes, I'm not, right? And I want to turn that around and want to say, I want to lead a life of yoga that's deep no matter what I do. And then maybe sometimes inconveniently interrupted by what they call reality as opposed to the other way around. And so monks are great. And I think monks are, we visited Bhutan, and Bhutan society recognizes that monks do some really great work for society, but you don't have to become a monk if you're not ready to do that in order to go deep.
Yeah. And actually okay, I was just texting if we can just all stay in here, but apparently we're supposed to close it down after we end it. But if we at some point can travel again, I think Bhutan is definitely, at least I should encourage people to go there. It's an amazing place. And with that, I added my email to the side chat, and I'll do it again, just in terms of anybody who wants to follow up with Charly and myself in terms of the deep impact journey and the templates that we have and the different work we've done. We'd be happy to share what we've done yeah, perfect. Charly also put his there. So
and also,
yeah.
I would just like to thank you so much for a really, really, really good session. That was deeply, deeply interesting. And also, and I would also like to point out that even if we're closing down this session now, I do not want you to end the conversation. So you can set up a session room for yourselves afterwards if people want to join you there, or you can go to the and you can post about it at we can post about it in the general event space, or you can meet up in the bar and keep this conversation going, because this is a topic that needs to be delved deeply into. Absolutely.
I feel like the bar is the perfect place for that, right?
It's just about that time now, especially for you, Charly.
How do you get to the bar?
Oh, it's
how do you get to the bar?
It's in the list. And now it's over 10 a.m. in California, so it's about time to get a beer.
Here we go. It's about high time.
Thank you guys so much for this.
Wonderful. Well, whoever
Cheers.
wants to come to the bar, come find us there. And thank you, everybody, for your questions and participation. I really enjoyed it as well. Thank you, Charly.
And thanks, everybody, also from my perspective. It was great to see the deep questions and the deep exploration. And hopefully we can do some of that together and co-create the new economy. And Ali, it was a pleasure, as always, to talk to you about these topics.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.